We're working through a series called The Story of God, and my attempt is to help us all grasp the story as a whole and not just a verse here and a story there, but to put it all together. So a couple of months ago, we started in Genesis in the book, the very first book of the Bible in the creation, and now we are at a point now where we're looking at the period of kings. And last week was the very first king of Israel, Saul, and today we're going to take a look at David, the one who succeeded him. Last week, if you were here, we saw that God gave the people the king that they wanted, but not the king that he wanted for them. But in one of those rare moments where they say, this is what we want, and God said, no, you don't. The people said, yes, we do. God said, fine. Let me show you how this is going to go. And they had a king, and then after a while, it went very poorly. God decided he was going to move on from Saul. He said, I'm done with you. I'm going to begin again with someone after my own heart. And when Samuel, the messenger of God, came to tell the first king, Saul, that he was no longer going to be the king, it broke him. He obviously didn't want to hear that. So he reached out and grabbed a hold of Samuel and as a way of saying, no, you're not going to lead me here. You're not going to give me this message. And Samuel, he was old, but he was spry, and he was running away. And part of his robe tore off in Saul's hand. And Samuel stopped, turned to Saul and said, just as you've torn off a piece of my robe, God is going to tear the kingdom out of your hands. And that was the end of the relationship between Samuel and Saul. So God told Samuel at that point, now go to this little town called Bethlehem, which did not have the significance that it has for you and me here today. But at that time, it was just a small little village. So he was to go to Bethlehem, and there he was going to anoint the next king of Israel, someone that God was going to choose, someone that God said was after his own heart. So he went to Bethlehem, found a man named Jesse, and he said, Jesse, we're going to have a worship service here tonight. I want you to gather up the people, get all the elders of the town, invite them to come along as well, and I want you to bring your family. And Samuel was prepared to anoint one of Jesse's sons to be the next king of Israel. Well, when all of the people arrived and they began the service, Samuel assumed that this would be Jesse's son, Eliab, who was the oldest, he was the tallest, the biggest, he was the one that would make sense. If you were going to choose someone from this village, someone from this family of Jesse, it would be him. But God said, not so fast. In 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 7, the Lord spoke to Samuel and said, do not consider his, talking about that oldest son, do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. Now, how Samuel was able to hear God that distinctly, I don't know. None of us does. But he was able to discern God's voice, and God said, no, that's not it. I am working inside out. And when I talk about a man after my own heart, I'm speaking literally. I want someone who has a heart like mine, and it's not him. So one by one, the other sons of Jesse came and stood before Samuel, and every time, I don't know if God or if Samuel stopped and said, what do you think, Lord? I don't know how that went, but every time God whispered, nope, that's not the one, not the one, not the one. So after all the sons had gone through a lineup, and after Samuel had rejected everyone, because he said the Lord had rejected everyone, Samuel said, is this all you've got? And Jesse told him, no, we've got little man. He's up in the field, and he's a shepherd, and so he's doing what shepherds do, but it didn't seem important for him to come to this. And Samuel said, bring him. So little man's called down. Little man's introduced as David. He looked at him and said, anoint him. He's the one. And in front of all his brothers, who I'm sure were thrilled, and in front of all his older brothers, David is anointed the next king of Israel. Now, even though that happened then, it would be some time before David officially took the throne and took the crown. It would be a long time because Saul wasn't going anywhere in his mind. So you had the king that God established, you had the king that God had anointed as the next king, and they're both very present and very real. One of them is very small, and one of them is established, obviously, already as the king of Israel. Now, when God was done with Saul, he said, obedience is better than sacrifice. That was the little phrase that resonated through that difficult moment. Well, when God began with David, He said, what's on the inside is more important than what is on the outside. So 2 ways really of saying the same thing. But if God were to call a lineup today to say, I'm done with the way things are right now, and I want to begin a revival. I want to start a time of renewal. I want to renew my relationship with my people, and I'm going to begin with a group of people. Most of us would assume that we're probably not going to be a part of that lineup. Like, we'll just be like little man and just hang out doing our job. Let us know who you pick, because we want to certainly recognize that and maybe even pray for them and support them and encourage them, but it won't be us. We assume that because of our appearance, because of our size, because of our strength, because of our abilities, our talents, because of our experiences. Some of you feel like because of things you've gone through, you've already disqualified yourself from even being a part of that lineup. We assume a lot of that. But 3,000 years ago, God gives us this moment to say, hold on. I don't know that you're viewing things the way I view things, because I'm looking inside out. I'm looking at the heart first. A week and a half ago, the high school football team that I'm with this year, we had an away game, and so I'm there on the sidelines with the other coaches and assistant coaches and all the players, and we're hanging out. There's almost 100 of us in total on the sideline. And while we're there, we're having an eye on the game, what's going on, talking with players and relaying things back and forth. And I feel someone coming by. I assumed it was one of the referees, so I backed up to give him space, because we can have a penalty called on us if you get too close to the field. And I turned, and then I realized, this is Coach Heupel. He's the head coach of the University of Tennessee. And I said, Coach? He said, Coach. And he just kind of kept walking. And there's this moment of what's going on. And he was Moses, kind of parting the players, going all the way to the other side. And they're all looking back at us, and we're looking at them. And we just kind of had a back and forth for the next hour or so. Every time a play was over, we turned and just looked at him. And I looked at a few of the kids and said, you want to know what it looks like to make $1 million? That is it. You wear, some black jogging pants and orange tennis shoes. This is what it looks like to be a millionaire. And then we were back and forth a little bit. And of course, the conversation turned to, who do you think he's coming to look at? Who do you think he's checking out? We already knew one of our players was committed to Tennessee, so he was looking at other people. So we're watching all this. And then as I'm listening to the conversation, it's apparent that the most clear thing is who he's not looking at. Because I mentioned to a couple of the kids, I said, man, hey, coach is here, make sure you do this or that. And they just laughed. He's not looking at me. I'm too little, I'm too short, I'm too slow, I don't get to play enough, we knew who he wasn't going to pick. We just weren't quite sure who he was actually wanting to talk to. And as kind of sad and defeating as that seems for a bunch of teenage boys to feel that way, that's how we live our lives, most of us. We assume that God works through a particular kind of person, a particular looking person, a particularly experienced person, and God says, no, that's not actually what I'm doing. So how does this whole inside first thing work itself out with us? I want to share with you a couple things that we find that actually spread David's entire story out here. But the first is that God is looking for those who will do the right thing, not just look the right way. That's very clear, obviously, from even this moment here. I'm looking for a man after my own heart. I'm looking for someone who has it on the inside. Man looks at the outside. I look at the inside. God is looking for those who will do the right thing, not just look the right way. And it's hard for us to even begin to grasp this truth because of the experiences we've had. We know there are certain doors that are open for certain people that are not open for us because of outward kinds of things. As I was just thinking about this principle this week, I was reminded of about something that happened over 20 years ago. My wife and I left our kids for the very first time for an entire night. I had been away. She may have been away, but I doubt it. But we'd never been away for our kids from an entire night, for both of us at least. So my parents came in, watched the kids. I think they were 2 and 0 or 3 and 1. They weren't very old at all. And we left and we went to New York for the weekend. And we're there staying in our hotel. It's a Sunday morning. No, we didn't go to church anywhere. A Sunday morning, and we're in our hotel room. And we turned on the TV, and because Sundays are busy days for me, I rarely ever get to watch the pregame stuff about the NFL. And so I turned it on. I was watching the pregame. I turned to her at one point, and I said, does that look familiar? She said, yeah, that's on the other side of our hotel right now. So the pregame show was starting. I said, well, she said, I'm getting dressed. So she got dressed really quickly, and we ran around out of our hotel, around the corner, and got to where they were setting up and where they were beginning to film the beginning parts of the 2-hour or 1.5-hour pregame show. So we stood around, they had bleachers up, and I thought, this is our chance to get on TV. This is a big deal. Why I was into that, I don't know. It probably says something negative about me, but I wanted to be on TV. And so I held her hand, and she was behind me. And I said, stay close here. There's going to be a lot of moving and pushing, so hang tight. So I'm leaning in, thinking they're going to come by and tab me to be on, TV. And they went by and looked me dead in the eye, looked me up and down, and just kept going. So I kind of thought, wait a minute, I know how this works. I said, come here. So I pulled her around. They came back through. They looked at her and said, come on. And she was holding my hand, and they asked her, is he with you? She said, yeah. So we both got to go. And so we're sitting there in the little bleachers and behind Deion Sanders and a bunch of people who were on there. And I pulled out my Nextel, and I flipped it up, and I started texting my friends. I was like, set your VCR. We're on, we're here. So trying to tell everybody we're on TV. There were doors there that were open because of outward stuff. And she hates the fact that I still remember that story. And so if you see her afterwards, I didn't say that here. But that's how most of us experience life. And yet even 3,000 years ago, God says, yeah, that's cute, but that's not what I do. I don't do that. I don't look around and evaluate you and compare you with what other people have as gifts or an appearance or anything like that. That's not how I choose to work. I'm choosing to use people, and I'm working through people who may not necessarily look the part, but they live the part and they act the part, and they're making those kinds of decisions. Saul looked the part. David did not. Saul led men, commanded respect, held a sword. David did not. He tended some sheep. He wrote songs, and he played the harp. That's just not the kind of guy you would say, that's the one. But yet that's the one that God chose. And obedience is going to win over appearance every single time. So you're not behind, and you're not at a disadvantage if you don't present in a particular way. God says, that's not what I'm looking at. I'm looking behind the scenes to see what's really going on in the heart. Secondly, God is looking for those who will champion his name and not make a name for themselves. Looking for people whose goal is to lift up, to champion his name, not their own. If we move forward a little bit after this anointing time, we find the most famous time in David's life, this moment with Goliath, the enemy from Philistia, and he and his Philistine army are right there, and they're on the other side of the valley from the Israelite army. There's some taunting going back and forth, really one-way taunting, but Israel's trying to talk, but they're just scared to death. And David arrives. He's not a part of the army. He's still too small. But he'd said, what's going on? Who's going to stand up for the name of the Lord? And everyone's scared to death, and he chooses to move forward. You have the little comical part of him trying to put on armor, and it's too big for him, and people are laughing at him, and all that's going on. But eventually, he gets to the battle. And in 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 45, David said to the Philistine, you come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. This very day I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands. He's not coming around saying, hey, David's in town. I'm the next king. Check me out. You're going to know my name. You're going to remember who I am. He just showed up and said, you can't talk about my God that way. That's not going to happen. And I may go down right here, but I am not going to be able to sit still while all this injustice is going on. He was there to champion God's name above his own. Didn't matter. Didn't matter the odds. Didn't matter what was going on. And I think in the moment in which he's in the field and not even showing up at the lineup, and in the moment when now he's running to battle, unafraid of what could happen, just going to do the right thing, I think we could look at his story and go, yeah, that's a man after God's own heart. I get it. It makes sense now. I understand why God would choose people like that. and not one of the other soldiers that was cowering, not one of the men who stood there arrogantly assuming he might be the one chosen as the next king. I get that. Like, you can begin to see these rhythms in his story. And there's one more that I want to share with you. It's in 1 Samuel chapter 24. I'm not going to read through this. I've actually shared this with you a few months back, so I'm not going to go there and spend much time. But at this point, David is growing. He's older. We don't know exactly how old, but he's not a little kid anymore. He's even got some people around him who support his claim to the throne, who understand what's going on, who understand that God has chosen him. But Saul is still the king. And in 1 Samuel chapter 24, Saul famously goes into this cave to use the bathroom. And while he's there to use the bathroom, what he doesn't understand is that David and his men are in the back of the cave. So they look up and they see the king coming in, taking his clothes off to use the bathroom. I mean, it's about the easiest victory you're ever going to have. And all of David's men say, man, God's put him right here. Like, God's put him naked and on the other kind of throne, right here. Like, we're here he is. And David says, no, I'm going to wait on his timing. I don't think this is how God is going to give me the throne. I don't think I have the right to harm or even touch the Lord's anointed. I don't think this is my time. And he waits, which is so different than what Saul had done earlier when Samuel showed up and said, what have you done, man? He said, well, I just offered up the sacrifices. Like, the army needs the blessing of the Lord. It's not a big deal. We know this should happen. I was tired of waiting on you. We got to get going. The guys are starting to lose heart, so I'm just going to offer this up. He didn't grasp what was really going on. And what was happening was God was trying to reveal that God is looking for those who will live by faith, not follow a religion. Saul was following a religion. Like, he had the rituals. He had the practices in place. He wasn't skipping church. Like, he was showing up whenever they needed to. He wasn't going to stand there with his arms folded while everybody's around singing the song. He's like, nope, we sing these songs. This is what we do. He wasn't going to not participate in the sacrifices. He was going to be a part of that. But it was a ritual. It was a tradition. It was something that just got God's favor and made God bless. It wasn't anything more than that. And yet David, in those quiet moments in which no one was watching, was taking step by step of obedience along the way, doing the faithful thing even when people weren't watching. And what I've discovered in my own life, and what many of you who have followed Jesus for a while probably have discovered in your own lives, is the most significant steps of faith, the most significant faith decisions you will ever make will be viewed by the fewest amount of people. They won't see them. They won't even know what's going on. If you were to fill out a thing today, saying, I'm ready to be baptized, and if that's you, we want to do that as quickly as we can. You'll come up out of that water, people will be hooping and hollering and clapping and, yeah, let's do this, and putting hands on you wanting to pray, which probably just scared half of you from being baptized. But it's a really cool thing, I promise. People are pumped up for you. People congratulate you, and you're like, well, I didn't save myself. But it doesn't matter. We're just trying to get it out. Like, we're so excited for you, which is great. Or if you have a talent or ability, or you have some sort of story, maybe sometimes it's shared and people are going, oh, that's incredible. Or you volunteer, you step up to help out, you're telling kids or telling people about Jesus, or you're volunteering. It's like, thank you so much. We get all that. But no one chases you around on a Tuesday and watches you when you're in a moment where you so badly want to say the words that everybody else knows you have a right to say, and you step back and say, no, God, help me to forgive, and just move on. When you do that, you don't have people around going, let's go. What a great decision. It's just you and God. And it's hard to continue to do that when no one's recognizing that. There's no one to clap when you stop and you have that same old thought that's been rattling around in your mind that you know you shouldn't have, and you stop and you say, no, not today. I'm going to trust in God. I'm going to make sure my mind is straight and clean and pure today. No one stops and says, let's go. You don't come home after work and your wife and kids go, woo, you decided to come back home. Like, just every little decision you make that is the right decision. That's living by faith, waiting on the Lord's timing. We don't get those moments of celebration, but those ultimately are those moments that will define who we are, or at least reveal who we are. And for David, it was little by little, just those small moments of, no, I'm going to stop. I'm going to wait. And in a moment like this, in the middle of this cave in 1 Samuel 24, I think we could all stop and go, yeah, that's what a man of God looks like. I get it now. Like, why would God choose this shepherd from this little town who's done nothing? Oh, I see now. I mean, all he wants to do is be faithful to the job that's in front of him. All he wants to do is defend the name of the Lord and make sure people know that God is great. He's willing to wait on God's timing, even when he's supposed to be the king and someone else has his crown, yet he's going to wait on God's timing, and he's not going to step out of bounds. He's not going to do a thing that God hasn't permitted him to do. That all makes sense. And if the story ended when Saul died and David took the crown and the kingdom is united, like, oh, that's a great story. A kid who became a king because he had a heart like God's. And if things all ended here, I think he would be one of our favorite guys that ever stepped into the pages of our scriptures. But his story did not end there. And there is a point some years later where he's on his own, by himself, still the king, but very broken. And we even have a little bit of a diary moment with the songs that he wrote. And he wrote, God, if I could offer you a sacrifice right now, I would. But that's not what you want. All I can give you is a broken heart. And it's all throughout Psalm 51. That's his diary of the moment. He's a broken man. And up until that point, he could have looked in the mirror at any given time and said, God, thank you for making me to be a man like you. Thank you for giving me a heart like yours. I see it. For the very first time, perhaps, he looked in the mirror and said, that's not a man of God. And we look into his story and say, that's not a man of God. He had an affair, got a girl pregnant. He arranged so her husband would be killed in battle so that he could cover it all up and he could take her as his wife and just begin to move forward like nothing ever happened. But he was found out and things were revealed and it broke him. And maybe for the first time in his life, certainly for the first time as we're looking at his story on pages, we see a man that I don't think I like him very much. And if this is my introduction to David, I'm not a fan, not at all. Not of a man who would have an affair covered up this way and go through all this stuff. Like, that's not the kind of guy that I look up to. Probably none of you would want to either. But what we do have, though, are hundreds of pages and nearly 100 different songs that we know David wrote. And if you read through those, we find his heart. From the time he was a kid, writing those songs after song after song of saying, God, I know that my confidence is found in you because you know that I'm blameless. And you don't turn your back on blameless people. You work through them. His confidence was all established on the fact that he knew he was a man after God's own heart. And now for the very first time, he had to question that. And if you're in a spot now where you're beginning to question your own godliness, for the very first time, maybe you're looking at yourself going, I don't know. I thought at a time that I was a man after God's own heart. I thought for a time I was a woman who had a heart like God. But now I don't know. Years have gone on and things have happened and stuff has gone on and some of it's public and some of it's private and some of it's personal and some of it hurts and all this stuff makes me question and wonder again. And I want you to know that the very name Satan, it means basically accuser. And he is going to do everything he can to remind you of the junk that causes you to doubt what kind of heart you actually have. And he is going to accuse you, and he's going to point out all the stuff, and he's going to deceive you. But I want to stand as a reminder today that if there was a time in your life when you met Jesus face to face and you had that time where he created a new heart within you, it's still there. And you're still his. And you still belong to him. And if the world and stuff and your decisions have caused that to be into question, I hope this is a space where you can be reminded of who you actually are. Because the last thing you need to try to do is to go through the rest of your life trying to convince yourself of something that you're not sure ever really existed. And that's what David could have done. But instead, He said, create in me a clean heart, O God. Renew a right spirit within me. Let the bones that you've crushed rejoice, and restore to me the joy of your salvation. That's that Psalm 51. He said, God, I want you to restore, renew. I want to return. And I wonder if there's a part of him that just said, take me back to that place where you once inspired me to write a song. And I said, the Lord is my shepherd. I shall not be in want. He makes me lie down in green pastures, and he leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. Like, I want to go back to that. I want to be that kid again. I'm a grown man with a crown and a past and a lot of regrets, but I want my heart to go back to that moment. And it is never too late to return home. And that's my encouragement to you today if you're in that spot. Now, if you've never met Jesus before, this is not about returning because you've never been there. If you've never met him before, I want to encourage you today just to go into his presence and say, God, I'm not here because I belong. I'm not barging in because I'm assuming anything. I just know that I'm told that you take people who are weary and broken and you give them rest, and that's what I need. And I put my life in your hands, and I'm trusting in Jesus to be my Savior.